On today's edition of Locked On LSU, SI recruiting insider John Garcia joins the show to answer the question about one of the biggest recruits in the country. Could he come to LSU?
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube as well. And I also want to let y'all know that today's edition of Locked On LSU is brought to you by SweatBlock. So if you or someone that you love is experiencing embarrassing sweat or odor, try SweatBlock. Save 20% with promo code LOCKEDON at sweatblock.com. Also available on Amazon. Well, thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Enjoying the show. It's been a minute. Happy to have John Garcia Jr. back on the podcast, recruiting insider for SA.com. John, I know that recruiting is probably at the forefront of a lot of fans' minds, like in June, July, and August. It's all a lot of talk about the recruiting rankings and who's coming in next year. But it seems like whenever these teams hit the field, nobody cares about recruiting anymore, and it's all about what happens on a Saturday in the fall. But, I mean, teams on the inside, they can't do that. Recruiting is in full force. So kind of an overarching question for you. What does the regular season mean for recruiting, and how can that affect both LSU and just college football in general's 2023 recruiting class?
Yeah, well, I think for a first-year staff like LSU, it's huge. I mean, it's going to be so different, right? It's going to feel so different than the Ed Orgeron regime in town, or even going back before that point. So it's always good to get kind of a current view of that culture, right? Especially when you're on campus for a game day. The games itself are always going to be impressive, and the fans and all that stuff. But I think when you're in-house, you get a better sense of just what this option would look like should you eventually end up at that school. So game day visits, whether official or unofficial, are huge. And then obviously from the official visit perspective, Caroline, you really need to hammer these on Saturday nights into Sunday mornings. This is where Brian Kelly and folks can actually spend intimate time with these recruits. The game is over. The dust has settled. You've done your press conferences, all that stuff. Now you can actually focus on recruiting. So obviously those visits have a different level of intimacy with them. And that's important for these recruits, right? Because they've got a lot of flying bullets to consider in one regard, with all these schools chasing them and all these visits. The game days, the watching of the film with the position coach, all that stuff could start to blur a little bit. But when you get to just sit down and talk to people, you do get a little bit more of an understanding. So for these coaches, it's about managing those visits, right? You know, who do we need to go spend time with of the official visitors? You know, who do we need to consider more? Do we need to take this kid to this side of campus to show him this part of, you know, this academic department or whatever it is? It's just an opportunity to push forward and really for a new coaching staff to set a precedent in the current recruiting class all at the same time. And then in between that, you're at high school games, you're offering new prospects, you're trying to confirm visits at a later date. It's really a masterclass of time management for all these coaching staff. So yeah, recruiting in season, although it doesn't get talked about as much, still very much at the forefront of the conversation. It leads to decommitments, verbal commitments, flips. It really does change kind of the course of recruiting, because anybody can be hot in the off season, right? There's not a lot going on. You can really set up some cool events, but during the season, if you impress recruits, it hits a lot harder, because we know these coaches, these support staffs, everybody is just so darn busy. So it's still a big deal.
And that's kind of my next question for you is, we know good and well that a commitment doesn't really mean that they are for sure going to be in an LSU uniform or committed to that school in 2023. Right. So what could happen, whether that's, you know, overachieving or underachieving expectations? You know, I look at Texas A&M, the top 10 team going into this season, and how does that affect their recruiting? I look at Tennessee, a team that is overachieving expectations very much so. How does that maybe make Tennessee a little bit more interesting to some of these recruits? And then looking at LSU, you know, a season that has been a little bit hot and cold for LSU, but really at this point, in my opinion, LSU was right on schedule. So in terms of wins and loss and on the field product, how does that affect commitments, decommitments, and kind of the cycle of this 23 class?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, you're seeing both extremes there, right? Obviously, Tennessee so hot after that Bama win. They already reeled in a wide receiver commitment. They're probably in line to get a couple more here in the next week or so. So when you get over a hump and it really feels like your program is in a totally different place, you do see some tangible returns from a recruiting perspective. And oftentimes on the opposite side of it, you see it in that regard as well, right? The Nebraskas, the Wisconsins of the world, the Colorados of the world that have already fired their coaches. Naturally, you're seeing decommitments and kids start to reshuffle the deck relative to those programs. So it's really about those extremes, right? If you're an Auburn commit, you're Googling and refreshing, Twitter every day because you're wondering, man, when is this shoe going to drop? What does this mean for me? Other schools are calling. So it's really about, are you unstable and worried, or are things rolling? And do you want to jump in before there's not any spots left for you? So that's really where we see the in-season, early season returns start to impact recruiting almost at a 1-to-1 ratio. Again, for LSU, it's more about establishment. It's more about, hey, getting this scheme in place. This is how we want to operate as an offense, as a defense, special teams included there as well. So it's more about showing more of what you sold kids on in the off season and saying, hey, look, we're here now. We're actually coaching games. This is what we're implementing at this point. This is where we want to be here going forward. So it's a bit of a different pitch for LSU compared to those other programs that we've talked about, but it's been good so far, right? We haven't seen any decommitments during the season. I think LSU is still going to be able to bring in a lot of talent for these games, a lot of official visitors later in the recruiting cycle as well. And it's shaping up to be a really nice class.
I think I've seen a few recruits. I look at Carnell Tate, for example, committed to Ohio State, and he also was planning to visit Tennessee this past weekend for the Alabama game. So maybe not necessarily specific to LSU, but just recruiting in general. If it does come up with an LSU recruit, what would your message be to an LSU fan that's a little bit concerned about an LSU commit that's continuing to take visits throughout the season?
Look, it's part of the deal, right? If you want to recruit elite prospects, and they've got, some availability on their schedule, schools are going to try to occupy that time. It's just a part of being a great school, a great recruiting program. You have to deal with that. You have to withstand that. And on the flip side, you're going to go after kids that are committed to other schools, right? So it works both ways. So from the LSU perspective, I would say, look, you got to keep recruiting your own commits. It's part of the deal. I'm sure Alabama's still calling Shelton Sampson. I'm sure, it's just a part of the game. I'm sure Womack is still getting phone calls from schools a lot closer to home, there in the D.C. area. It's just a part of the deal. So it's something that Brian Kelly is well aware of. This coaching staff has been through that at previous stops, and now they're dealing with it at LSU. It's something that until a decommitment happens, you feel like it's possible, but it's not something to worry about until you start to feel the tea leaves tingling a little bit. There usually is an indicator, right? Like a prospect's visiting a bunch of other schools. He's not talking about LSU as much. You can almost see it coming. But then on the flip side, you see kids doubling down. I saw Ryan Yates put out, hey, my recruitment is shut down. I'm a Texan. Other schools are calling, but I'm going to LSU. So it really does work both ways. And I think, like you said, the on-schedule timeliness of LSU has left a positive impression more times than not with this current group of verbal commitments. Nobody's disappointed when they committed in the offseason and now they're on board. Now, we haven't seen that shift in perception negatively towards LSU.
Coming up next, one of the top recruits in the country still has yet to commit to where he wants to go in 2023. Is LSU in the mix? We'll get into that coming up next. So I have a good friend of mine who I'm actually going to see today. Oh, crazy how that works. But he has been suffering with excessive hand sweat almost his entire life. He was so worried about shaking people's hands whenever he met them for the first time, or, getting nervous, and then your natural sweat starts kicking in, and his hands would be so wet he couldn't even grip on to a water bottle and couldn't even, wipe his hands off on his pants. That's how sweaty his hands were. So that was Nick, and he was able to fix his problem with SweatBlock. SweatBlock was created by a doctor to help with his own excessive sweating. It's doctor created and also doctor recommended. So if you or someone that you love is experiencing embarrassing sweat or odor, try SweatBlock. My friend Nick uses it. He swears by it. Now he has no reservations or embarrassment when shaking people's hands. He can just live a normal life again. So save 20% with promo code LOCKEDON at sweatblock.com, also available on Amazon. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. We're on YouTube as well, so check us out there. Again, recruiting insider for SportsIllustrated.com, John Garcia Jr. is with us. Nicholas Harbor. He's a 5-star, uncommitted athlete out of the D.C. area. He's interested all over. He's looking at Michigan and Maryland, some schools closer to home. But LSU is also on that short list that he's interested in. First and foremost, who is Nicholas Harbor? What makes him so special? Why is he a 5-star? Why is he getting interest from all over in college football?
What makes him a star? Look, he would be your number one recruit, whether you're looking at a defensive end, a potential tight end, or a sprinter on the track and field. That is how special he is as an athlete. 6'4", 6'5", 230 pounds or so, running 10.2 in the 100-meter dash. He's got Olympic dreams on a tight end, defensive end body. So he is naturally, going to be extremely coveted until he signs his letter on a national letter of intent. And LSU's been one of the programs doing a really great job at selling both angles, right? We know LSU is no slouch on the football field. Certainly track has upheld its own reputation in that regard. And I think, it's one of the better options he has in terms of both sports. He is confirmed that he will play both sports at the next level. So a lot of schools are selling, well, we're really good at this sport and we're getting better at this sport. But LSU's got both. LSU and Oregon have both very much at their disposal from the football and track standpoint. Michigan, South Carolina are more one-sided, one sport versus the other. So I think that's part of the reason why LSU has always been involved with Harbor under this coaching staff. And now it's just about getting him on campus, right? They had a trip, I think, that was scheduled for this month. There was a conflict logistically. I think it had to do with his high school game. So now it looks like it might be better news for LSU, because now it looks like he'll visit later in the recruiting cycle. So naturally closer to when he would actually sign a national letter of intent. So I think that's huge news for the Tigers. Look, stiff competition in this deal. We mentioned Oregon with their 2-sport approach. Michigan academically has made an impression here. South Carolina, I think, is the school that's got him on campus the most. So this is a true national battle with some twists and turns, right? It's not the usual suspects in this race. It's not Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, Clemson. It's a different group of schools for a different kind of kid, right? Track is a huge deal. Academics, a big deal. I think his dad works for NASA. This is a unique recruit in a lot of ways. Sport is only a part of this equation. So LSU knows that. And I think there's an advantage towards having that last visit, or one of the last visits, because now you can double down on that approach, right? Let's make sure this academic presentation goes down with him and his parents. Let's make sure the track coach pushes this angle on and he gets time over there. So it really is a bit more of an advantage for LSU to have almost the last shot, at least right now, the last shot for Harbor in terms of his official visit. So if and when that comes in December, it'll be all hands on deck for LSU, and he would obviously be a heck of a final piece or two in this class of 23.
3 questions for you based off of that. First, you say tight end and defensive end. It's a pretty wide spectrum of skill and ability. Is there one side that he's better at, or one side that he too wants to play? Like, he wants to be an offensive player. He wants to be that kind of pass rushing, big body defensive guy. What's the priority there, and what's he best at?
There's been some back and forth. It's been fascinating. I think his upside on defense would be a little bit higher, but he's more comfortable on offense right now. So I do think that's something, in LSU's case, playing a true freshman a ton in Mason Taylor, that's something they could sell. Hey, look, this guy's a teenager just like you, and he's coming in and he's making a huge impact. So I do think offense is a little bit more where he's leaning towards, but he hasn't shut the door, as far as I understand, on defense, or maybe even, another spot, right? Could he develop into an off-ball linebacker? How much weight is he going to put on if track is still going to be very important in this thing? He might just be a big wide receiver when all is said and done. There's still a lot to be said on the football field. He's much more polished and comfortable on the track. Football is more about the possibility, the potential down the line that he might be able to exhibit, but you just can't teach that size and that speed all in one package, and obviously some intellect there along with it. So he's really the unicorn freak, most unique prospect that's available in this entire class. And that's why his recruitment has become just as fascinating, because it's not just a simple approach for any of these schools. Everything is layers upon layers in how you approach Nicholas Harbor. And even his position projection is one of those things.
He sounds special. But second question for you, you mentioned that he'll be visiting later on in the recruiting cycle. I think the last I saw was sometime in December. And that your perspective of it, of being an advantage for LSU, is not something that I thought about personally, because I viewed that as possibly a disadvantage, that he wouldn't get the opportunity to be on campus for a game day and see the game day environment and be on the field in the middle of the game. But I also see where you're coming from, where it's going to be fresh in his mind, and his visit to LSU is going to be so close to his commitment day. So, advantage, disadvantage, or is it just kind of, that's how the timing works?
Well, yeah, you certainly, the game day atmosphere at LSU speaks for itself. I think everybody understands that. You would want to get him there for a game, but if you couldn't, this is about the next best scenario, because now if it's, I believe, the weekend of December 2nd, so it's after the rivalry weekend.
Right.
So unless LSU is in the title game, they'll be able to have their entire coaching staff in Baton Rouge without a tangible game to prepare for. So that means more time with Harbor. So on these visits to South Carolina and Michigan, he hasn't been able to receive that intimate attention from these coaching staffs the entire 48-hour visit. Maybe the back half of it, right? Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, after the game, all that dust is settled. But on Saturdays, these coaches have a game to go win, right? They have to prepare, they have to follow up, all that stuff. So it will tangibly be the most time he's been able to spend on any of these campuses for an official visit relative to the coaches themselves. So that, I think, is a huge advantage for Brian Kelly and company. And again, based on the early official visits, you're also kind of figuring out tweaks to that game plan, right? Who does he need to spend time with? Who does the family need to spend time with? How do we want to present this in this way based on some of the returns from South Carolina and Michigan to date? So it's a yin and a yang, certainly from an advantage standpoint, but I think with a kid who appears still relatively far off in making that decision, it's almost the later the better from an official visit standpoint. So you could argue that LSU is in the best position relative to that timeline.
Okay, interesting. I like the perspective. And then third question I have for you is, he's looking all over the place, but he's from D.C. and Maryland, South Carolina, Michigan. Those are all schools that are much closer to home than LSU. And although LSU is closer to home than Oregon is, how high on his list of priorities is staying close to home?
I think when you have Olympic aspirations, that stuff has to go out the window, right? I mean, you can't prioritize the proximity to home. Look, Maryland's in this race. I don't want to exclude them. They're absolutely trying to keep, the best player in a few recruiting cycles home. Absolutely. Mike Locksley and company are going to be all in on Harbor, just like a lot of schools we haven't even talked about, right? This thing hasn't been narrowed down. Miami's involved. A couple other, USC is involved to a degree. Everyone's trying to stay in this race. But I don't think proximity to home is going to be a huge factor in this thing. He's too smart. He's been recruited for too long, and he's too aspirational to limit that part of the game. And look at what we talked about: USC, Oregon, LSU, all in this conversation. Miami, schools very much far away from that DMV footprint. So yeah, I don't think location is going to be a huge factor in this recruitment, which is another reason why it feels so unconventional, right? Typically, hey, the in-state school is going to always be right in the thick of it. And while Maryland is in it, it doesn't feel like they're at the top of this race or near the top of the race. So yeah, a lot of outside the box stuff with Nicholas Harbor. And that's why it's been so fascinating.
Well, we'll keep an eye on Nicholas Harbor and some other potential 2023 recruits that could join this 2023 class. LSU's already got a pretty solid 23 class, but how should LSU fans feel about this class compared to the rest of the SEC? We'll get into that coming up next. So these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business. And you want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. So that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. So it's football season. We all know that if you work in sports, this is the busiest time of year. And unfortunately, this radio station that I work for, we had a producer go find a new opportunity elsewhere right in the middle of football season. And we needed someone to fill that role fast. So we went to LinkedIn Jobs because they took care of all of the dirty work for us. They filtered through all of the candidates. They took away any candidates who didn't have the correct skills or expertise that we were looking for. And LinkedIn Jobs gave us a pool of candidates that had the right expertise, the right experience, and the exact skills that we needed. And we were able to fill that role. We did not miss a beat in the most important season of the year during football season. Super, super easy to create a free job on LinkedIn Jobs. You just go to LinkedIn, add a new job, and then add the purple hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you are hiring. They've got super simple tools like the screening questions, like I mentioned, that make it easy for you to focus on the candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you would like to interview and hire. So we're getting to the end of the year. We're in quarter 4, and I know that you probably have some end of the year goals that you would like to reach. And what better way to reach those goals than finding the right team member to help you do that? So that's why small businesses rank LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So LSU currently sitting at #6, I believe, in the recruiting, seven in the recruiting rankings for the 2023 class. They're behind Alabama and Georgia at 1 and 2 respectively in the SEC. LSU sitting behind Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Ohio State, and Texas in the recruiting rankings for 2023. But LSU, third best recruiting class where it stands for 2023 in the SEC. And you see Florida and Tennessee pretty close behind. But if you look at the rest of the SEC West, look at Arkansas, Texas A&M in the high teens, and the rest of the SEC West kind of falling behind in the recruiting rankings. How should LSU fans feel right now about the 23 class compared to the rest of the SEC, and more specifically the SEC West?
Yeah, I think, at one point in the summer, I know there was a lot of worry, right? There weren't a lot of Louisianans in this recruiting class. You were dipping down into the Southeast and into Texas a little more than maybe folks locally would have liked, but that's been corrected, right? You've hit home runs within state lines at priority position. We talked about Sampson. I mean, look, these old linemen that have been brought in close to homes, the Lance Hurd, the most recent, huge pickups for LSU. So this class is appearing incredibly balanced. You flipped Ricky Collins, so now you've got a quarterback on board in this group as well, which is going to be important here because the portal and fluidity at that position is always important with how we view college football. So this is a big balanced class, and now you're just swinging for the fences. You're going after the Nicholas Harbors. You're just trying to get the highest level prospects on board here to close it out, while also holding on to these verbal commitments that you've already gotten on board publicly. And I think if you told an LSU fan 6 months ago, hey, Bama and Georgia are going to be the only SEC schools ranked ahead of you in recruiting, any LSU fan would have taken that, because that's the expectation, right? Those are the schools that you always feel like are #1 in recruiting anyway. So to be above A&M, to be above Tennessee after what they've been able to put together and make a run in this 23 class, to be above Ole Miss, which on the field is obviously, producing at a bit of a higher clip at this point. I think that's huge news for LSU in the first full cycle for Brian Kelly and the company. You only expect that to get better moving forward, right? There's going to be more comfort. There's going to be more time to extend offers sooner to the 2024, 2025 class, which are going to be stacked in Louisiana as always. So if it's already at this pace, you feel really good about where it is now and certainly about the future simultaneously.
And last one for you, John. I mean, you mentioned, Alabama and Georgia are going to be the teams, and also you throw in Florida and other teams, Ole Miss, Arkansas, Texas A&M. Those are the teams that you're going to be consistently competing with. And looking at the current recruiting rankings, that's really kind of how it's laying out. Now, you are so much more involved in the recruiting space than I am, but from my outsider view, it looks like all of these changes in college football that everyone was so worried about changing college football hasn't really changed much. I mean, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Texas, Notre Dame, Ohio State, being at the top of the recruiting rankings. Well, that's just, same stuff, different year.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, Texas is maybe the only surprise in that list. And look, when you get Arch Manning, that's going to happen. Right. So I think, it's more of the same as things even out, NIL stuff, all that evens itself out. Look, LSU, again, I've made this argument probably with you already. All things even, it's arguably the best job and spot in the country from a recruiting standpoint, right? You've got no in-state competitor in the SEC. You are an NFL production machine from a geography and per capita standpoint in that New Orleans metro alone. So it's a great job. The brand is carrying, even with, the offseason Brian Kelly jokes included. This thing is rolling right now for LSU. The on-field product has held up its end of that conversation. Obviously, still a long way to go there. But look, it feels like LSU is going to pick off a team or two that they're not supposed to beat, right? I think there was some surprise in how much control that Florida game LSU had. And I think there's going to be a lot of worry when folks line up to play the Tigers here going forward. So recruiting is going to reflect that as well. And I think the ship has already been steadied, maybe sooner than we expected under Brian Kelly.
John, appreciate you. Where can the people find you?
Yeah, real simple, si.com/college, or on Twitter, it's just my name, John Garcia _JR.
I appreciate your recruiting insight. We'll chat with you soon.
Always a pleasure. Take care.